The wait is finally over, and here we have official SteamOS running on non-Steam Deck hardware. This is my original ROG Ally running pure and beautiful SteamOS without the use of Bazzite or Chimera or any other third-party package. And this is thanks to the recent SteamOS 3.7.8 Go Country update, which is the first SteamOS release that includes official support for other handhelds like the Lenovo Legion Go and the Asus ROG Ally like this guy. But technically it should work with any handheld or desktop device that is rocking Team Red and has an NVMe drive built in, which you'll see why in a second. So in this video, we're going to cover the installation process, then how to configure SteamOS to run more nicely on non-Steam Deck hardware, and how to install wonderful things like EmuDeck, which help us get the most out of these awesome handhelds. First off, in the installation process, we'll want to grab the latest recovery image of SteamOS from the link in the description. In my case, I could only find the one for 3.7.7, but it turned out not to matter because the necessary drivers for my Ally were included in that version anyway, and once it was installed, I was able to update to 0.8 easily from SteamOS. We'll go ahead and flash that to your USB drive of choice, likely using something like Balena Etcher. In my case, for some reason, Etcher really didn't like my flash drive, so I actually had to manually unzip the image and then use this series of commands from the macOS terminal to manually write it to my USB drive, but we got it working. And while you're waiting for that to flash, you can take a look at the release notes for the Go Country update, which outside of including support for non-Steam Deck handhelds, it also updated the version of Arch Linux it's using, the Linux kernel, Mesa graphics, letting you limit the battery to 80% charge to protect battery health, and a bunch of other fixes and improvements. I'll add a link in the description to this official article by Valve that describes some of the special steps for installing SteamOS on alternate handhelds like the Ally, and in my case it advised me to boot into the BIOS of my Ally and turn off Secure Boot so that I could boot from and install SteamOS properly, which can be done by holding down the volume button during post, heading over to advanced mode, Secure Boot, and disabling it, just like we did when we installed Bazzite on this guy. After that's saved, we'll open up the boot menu and choose our USB drive, which will then boot us into this SteamOS desktop here. And from there, using the touchscreen, we can just tap wipe device and install SteamOS. And then all you gotta do is tap proceed. If you've installed a Linux operating system before, you'll notice the lack of the step-by-step instructions for guiding you through where you want it to install, where you want your partitions to be, and all that stuff. And that's because this is meant to be an easy one-click install, intended to keep as much of the Linux complexity away from the average gamer as possible, which is why the internal NVMe drive is needed, because the one-click script that's used to wipe and install SteamOS is looking to find that NVMe device to install it to. So after a couple minutes, you'll see re-imaging complete, choose proceed to reboot now, which we will do. And after that reboot, your Ally or whatever device is going to be looking and feeling a lot like a Steam Deck, because you'll then see the standard Steam Deck onboarding wizard where you'll select your language and maybe answer a couple of other questions, after which SteamOS will do a couple more setup steps, reboot, and then greet you with the classic Steam sign-in screen where you can just scan the QR code with your phone or sign in with your username and password manually. And just like that, you're running full tilt official Valve SteamOS on your handheld, which is sick. And one really nice advantage I noticed in this installation process versus something like Bazzite is that I didn't have to plug in a controller or mouse once. I was able to do the install process completely from the touchscreen, which is really nice with a device like this. After signing in, you'll see the nice little Steam Deck getting started wizard that'll take you through what your buttons do and all that. Note that on the ROG Ally in particular, this guy here is known as the Steam button, and this guy here is the quick access button, I believe. And after the onboarding wizard, I went straight to the system settings to apply the latest update, being the actual Go Country update that I couldn't download directly from their site at the time. And if you're following along at home, once that installs and reboots, you can effectively start just installing games and enjoying your new SteamOS equipped device. For those who want to make SteamOS feel just a little more at home with their third-party hardware, here are a couple configuration tips I found really helpful. The first is that when you're over in the quick access menu, you'll notice that you don't have the ability to set the TDP of your third-party handheld, which I found quite annoying because I like to downscale that real far if I'm playing something like Stardew Valley, or higher up if I'm playing something more intense. But thankfully that can be fixed with a nice little plugin for Decky called Simple Decky TDP, which lets you set the wattage, minimum TDP, max TDP, per game profiles, and a ton more little settings you might like. But the first thing we'll have to do is install Decky. So what we're going to do is we're going to hop over to the power menu and switch to desktop, and then we'll be greeted with the KDE desktop environment. Now before we install Decky, something I came across is that sometimes, and not all the time, the built-in controller won't actually be registered by desktop mode, which is actually happening right now. You'll see my mouse pointer isn't going anywhere, and the Steam plus X shortcut to open the keyboard is not doing anything, which is quite annoying. I tried a couple of fixes, but wasn't able to find one, so if you did, maybe let me know in the comments below and share with the class if you please. But thankfully the touchscreen always works, so the solution I landed on was to go to the Discover menu here, which is just just the KDE sort of software explorer to easily install packages. And if you go over to accessibility, one of the few options available here is core keyboard. And if you install that, you can then find it over here in the menu, and then utilities and core keyboard. And once you open that, you'll have a lovely on-screen keyboard, which is very necessary for doing the installation steps for Decky. And the nice thing is once you open it, you can collapse it and easily summon it back with this little button right here to bring it back up, which ends up being just as convenient as the Steam X shortcut would have been. So problem solved-ish. The next thing we're going to do is tap on Firefox, which at first it'll actually ask you to install it through Discover, which is fine. Go ahead and do that. And then you're going to browse to decky.xyz and hit download, and then open up your downloads folder in the Dolphin file browser and tap on the .download file it gave you, and then hit continue when it says it will install Decky. Now, if you haven't yet set an admin password, Decky will offer to temporarily set one to install itself and then remove it, which sounds great until you have to install stuff later. And so I ended up doing it later, but now would probably be an ideal time to set the password, which you can do by just opening the console terminal and typing PASSWD, which will then prompt you to enter your new admin password, which you'll do and press enter, and type it again and press enter, and then you're good to go. After Decky is installed, we'll go to the GitHub linked in the description for simple Decky TDP, and on the GitHub page, it gives us this nice little one-liner command that we can just paste into the console and hit enter. And this is where having that password set will come in very handy. So we'll go ahead and punch in that password you just created and hit enter. And while we're in desktop mode grabbing plugins for Decky, we'll also head over to this link in the description to grab HueSync, which lets us enable and control the RGB on devices like the ROG Ally. For those of you who are like me that don't really care that RGB's on there, but since it's on there, it may as well be working, right? And in the same way, we'll pop that little one-liner into the terminal, hit enter, punch in our admin password, and we're off to the races. And after all that, we'll go ahead and restart, which will boot us back into gaming mode. And yes, you can head back to gaming mode by just hitting the link on the desktop, but we want to restart since we just installed a bunch of stuff. And once we're booted back up, you can head over into the quick access menu like before, but now at the very bottom, you'll see a little plug icon, which is Decky. And then in that menu, you'll see the Decky plugins we've installed so far, notably Simple Decky TDP and HueSync, which are both quite straightforward if you're familiar with configuring the little settings in the Legion Go settings panel or the ROG Ally settings panel that ship with their Windows variants. And it's super nice to still have this control available while in SteamOS. And while we're in this menu, you'll notice the little marketplace icon here in the Decky menu, which is super nice because it lets you just browse all the various plugins and options you can install into Decky with just a click. And a few that I found that I really like are Magic Pods, which lets you control things like your AirPods that you might connect to your device. Is There Any Deal for Deck, which adds this little text at the bottom of the screen when you're viewing a game. It'll show you the lowest price it's sold for, which is super nice to avoid those accidental higher price purchases. And EmuDecky, which exposes some controls for EmuDeck, which we'll install right now. If you don't know, EmuDeck is a super nice way to manage the many emulators available on SteamOS, going all the way up to Xenia for Xbox 360, Cemu for Wii U, and options for the Switch. You can also set it into multiple modes. One of the modes will put all of your games individually in your Steam library, but I like to have this separation, so I chose to just have the emulation station front end as a single game entry that I can boot into, which is really nice because then I can choose my little Wii theme here, which I really like. And for those curious, it's called ESDWE. Thank you to whoever made that. Love it. And the beautiful thing is the whole thing acts like a single Steam game, so you can just pop into the menu here, head down and exit game just like anything else, and it really keeps the whole cohesive experience alive versus the way I was managing my emulators on Windows, where I had to pop in and out of a bunch of different apps, which was really tedious and really broke the experience. Apparently, EmuDeck is available on other platforms like Windows as well, so if you're watching this and want to give it a crack, then feel free. But anyway, how do we install EmuDeck? Well, first we'll go back over to the desktop mode, and then in Firefox, we'll head over to emudeck.com, and we'll choose download, choose SteamOS, and I'm not yet a Patreon, so I chose download for free. Then we'll go ahead and open the file browser like before, and tap the emudeck.desktop.download file. We'll go ahead and proceed with that, and then it'll go ahead and start installing EmuDeck. And then after a second, we'll see this pretty little EmuDeck guided installation wizard pop up, which is decently self-explanatory, especially if you choose easy mode. I chose custom mode because I've been in the emulation space for a little while, and I'm very used to customizing my setup. But the long and short of it is, you're gonna point it at where your ROMs folder is. In my case, they were located on my SD card. You'll choose your hardware. In my case, I just chose Steam Deck. Pick your level of integration, and like I said, I chose low so that I would just have the emulation station front end as a single entry in my game library. You can pick your theme from here, which in my experience didn't transfer over to my final product. I had to choose it again, but maybe it'll work for you. And then from there, you can get as nitty-gritty as you want. In my case, I chose not to install certain emulators I knew I wouldn't be using, and I dug down all the way to choosing certain aspect ratios for certain consoles and turning on CRT scan lines for certain consoles and keeping them off for others, which is all just based on user preference. Then you'll just let it cook for a while as it installs many little packages and settings and moves things around on your file system. And after all that, the wizard should return to ask you where you want to copy your games from. In my case, I chose to have it create the folder structure on a blank USB flash drive, and then I added the ROMs to those folders from a different computer and then brought it back over. The copy process was not super fast because in my case I was going from an average speed USB drive to an average speed micro SD card. So if you've got a ton of games, you might want to go the manual route and copy these over later in a way that you prefer. And also at this step, it'll guide you in copying your BIOS files into the right spot. And if you chose high integration, you should see all your games showing up as individual titles. And if you chose low integration like me, you should see the emulation station option over in library, and then you scroll over to non-Steam and it'll be right there. Now, here's the thing. Actual game performance to me feels pretty much the same as Windows, but Dave2D did just put out a video recently that showed that the SteamOS performance on the Legion Go S was about 10 frames better than the equivalent version on Windows, which was pretty awesome. And I'm a pretty big believer in getting Windows out of the way so that Linux can do its thing, so I'm not too surprised by those results. Obviously, when you're switching from Windows to Linux gaming, you do have a slightly smaller library of games you can play. Notably, in my case, I have certain games on the Windows Store that I bought, so I can't play those here, and the one everyone talks about, which is Fortnite from the Epic Store. So you can't play that guy on here either, which just comes down to how Epic chose to handle their anti-cheat, which doesn't play so nice with Linux. I haven't had this setup installed long enough to do any long-term battery tests with SteamOS versus Windows, but if there are any particular metrics you guys want to see, let me know in the comments and I can see what I can do. From a general device usage perspective, you can really feel how integrated it feels compared to Windows especially, but even something like Bazzite, just when I hit this button here and I see that Steam quick menu and there's no stuttering or there's no breaking the fourth wall, just a little bit of a layer on top here that Bazzite had to add to make this or that happen, I can just slide on down and hit exit game, no questions asked, and I'm right back on SteamOS, nice and liquid fast. It just feels so nice and properly console-like. I also love being able to head to my library and see the SteamOS compatible section, which in reality doesn't limit my choices because thanks to Proton, I can play pretty much my entire library on here, such as Retro Kart Rush, which is a super light little Godot-based game. And another one of those really nice console-like feels is the sleep setting. So if I just hit pause here on this guy, and then I go ahead and just tap that lock button, and we got the little ROG flashing sleep indicator, tap that power button again, boom, and resume. And we're right back in it. Super, super nice. Look at that. No having to manage my windows and swipe up to get to the Windows start menu to find my open game, to go over here to switch over to that screen, or any of that noise. Just get me in the game, get me out of that game, get me into the next game. Love it. On the topic of speed, let's do a boot speed test with SteamOS on the ROG Ally. Got my little timer here. Ready, set, buzzed, go. Boom. So that's 40 seconds from cold boot all the way to network connected and we're in Steam, which is pretty nice. On Windows right now, I'll be waiting for both Steam Big Picture and the Asus Armory Crate to load, so I'd have access to all my stuff, and then I'd get my update prompts and all that fun stuff, and a driver update here, and similar to the feeling when I installed Bazzite, this just feels so much more properly console-like, and I can just jump in and start playing my games and not feel like I'm having to constantly use the touchscreen to manage Windows, and instead I'm just enjoying games. And I guess that's one of the big questions, like, should you choose official SteamOS over Bazzite? And in my experience, the answer is if your hardware is officially supported by SteamOS, then yes, because why imitate the feeling of SteamOS when you can use SteamOS? Like, I know Bazzite is basically using the same stuff, but just knowing this is like straight from Valve, this is my closest experience to owning a Steam Deck I've ever had because I've never owned one. And so seeing the little SteamOS compatible tab here and the delightful scaled up UI and the settings all just being what you see is what you get, and also being able to leverage all the enhancements that developers have made to the Steam Deck over the years, such as the Decky plugin system and all these wonderful plugins here. This really just feels like the best of both worlds, especially because I now have the official Steam Deck software on hardware that has more power in it than the Steam Deck hardware, making this feel like the real sweet spot for handheld PC gaming. Let me know in the comments below if you're going to be installing SteamOS on your handheld, and if there are any setup tips I missed for your handheld in particular. If you like this video, you should check out the video where I installed Bazzite on my ROG Ally, which if you can't officially run SteamOS on your hardware, Bazzite should have you covered, so that's worth a look. Please subscribe if you want to help out the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.